Hello, I'm Seth Poho, and welcome to Poho's Bullpen, where we talk about baseball and sometimes a little bit more. As spring training is in full swing now, I wanted to talk to journalists covering teams that really intrigued me coming into this 2019 season. Being a native Midwesterner, I always have a soft spot for the AL Central, one of which would include the Minnesota Twins. Joining me on today's episode is senior baseball editor at the Zone Coverage of Minnesota, Brandon Warne. Brandon, thanks for stopping by the bullpen today.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, I think the American League Central has a lot of soft spots if you ask most baseball writers. So I totally know where you're coming from there.
Well, I mean, I'm a native Ohioan, and obviously, the Indians have, let's be realistic, have been kind of blessed, especially last season with, I hate to say how weak the AL Central was,
Mm-hmm.
but let's be realistic. I mean, the Tigers were in a rebuild, and they're still in a rebuild. Kansas City was unloading everybody. The White Sox were still in the midst of the rebuild. The only team that I felt going into 2018 that was a threat, and I was kind of looking forward to it with the way that they, got themselves in the 2017 AL wildcard game, was the Minnesota Twins. There's so many good young players coming together, and unfortunately, 2018 just did not work out well for them.
Yeah, and I can relate growing up watching the Twins when they started winning division titles back in 2002, and they kind of beat up on some really bad Royals teams, and the Tigers were historically bad, I think, the next year after that. So there's not a lot of shame in beating up on the rest of your division. It just sometimes can mean that when you go to the playoffs, you're not quite as battle tested to face the, at least at that time, Yankees, and now it's Red Sox and whoever else gets in the way of whoever wins the Central. But yeah, if we look back at 2018, a lot of things went wrong for the Twins to the point where you almost look back and think 78 wins was surprising. I mean, any one of Jorge Polanco being suspended, Irvin Santana basically missing the whole season, Miguel Sano having the offseason cloud over his status and then not being healthy for much of the season and not being productive either. Byron Buxton getting hurt. I mean, Brian Dozier fell off the table. Joe Mauer didn't have a real great season, obviously his farewell season. Just so many things went wrong. Lance Lynn was absolutely terrible. And they still managed to be almost 500. I think that means that while they're going to be slept on a little bit for this season, there is a lot of optimism despite the fact that they're bringing in a new manager and some new talent as well.
Yeah, and bringing up Lance Lynn, I felt so bad because I always loved watching him when he was pitching in St. Louis, and I'm like, all right, that's a good kind of pitcher, that's a good innings eater, especially when you
Mm-hmm.
talk about how young a lot of those key guys on that staff were. Because obviously in 2017, the one knock against the Twins getting in the AL wildcard game was they don't really have that much depth of a bullpen. And you're thinking, all right, you get a couple of veteran guys like Santana and Lynn, again, good innings eater guys, and it didn't work out. And going beyond that, I mean, it was kind of disappointing the fact that you saw Paul Molitor go from AL Manager of the Year to all of a sudden being, well, Molitor may not necessarily work as a manager for this team. And it's kind of refreshing to see them bring in a young face now like Rocco Baldelli.
Yeah, I think the writing was on the wall when those guys took over after Terry Ryan was fired that eventually they're going to want their own manager. And it's tough because not only is Paul Molitor a Hall of Famer, but he was born and raised in Minnesota, came back and finished his career in Minnesota as a player, and then was a coach on Ron Gardenhire's staff before he was hired as manager. And so, yeah, I think a lot of fans, especially since the Midwest, there's a lot of like cottage industry stuff where people like their own people. They have that old friend and that hometown feel. And so they're always looking for Minnesota people to rise up, just like Joe Mauer, obviously, whose career just ended. So there was a lot of like sour tastes left in people's mouths when Molitor was let go, despite winning, nearly as many games as he lost in a lost season. And yet, I think Rocco Baldelli's got a lot of people really excited because he's done a little bit of everything in baseball. Obviously, he played, went through some struggles there, both on the field and then off the field with his health. He's scouted, he's coached, he's managed, he's done pretty much everything you can do in the game of baseball, on the minor league side or in the big league side. And so this is the next challenge for him, and they've put him in position with a bunch of coaches that kind of touch all the different bases. They've got a Spanish speaking coach, and they've got an older coach who is actually Rocco's AAA manager in Durham, and they've got some analytics guys, and they've got some communicators, and then Rocco is kind of the chief at the top who really is well versed in just about everything except for speaking Spanish, he said at his intro presser. So they've really created a fun, an intriguing staff that I think is going to do a lot of things to help make this first year of managing for him about as easy as possible.
It almost seems weird though, that you had that, of course, you mentioned the cottage industry of trying to see the local kids trying to succeed. And it almost seemed kind of weird with the Twins getting rid of a manager that quickly. Because, let's be realistic. I mean, as long as I've been alive, it feels like as if the Twins would have been either managed by either, oh gosh, I can't think of his name.
Tom Kelly.
Tom Kelly and or
Yeah.
Ron Gardenhire. And now it's like you go with the new school approach of Baldelli. Do you think early on, do you think he could possibly be one of those kind of managers that could be a long-term fixture in Minnesota?
Yeah, I think his age helps too. And actually, this is kind of funny. You talk about the stability of managers, and the Twins had Kelly starting in late '86, Gardenhire after him. Every manager that had been a Twins manager while Joe Mauer was alive, with the exception of Billy Gardner, who Tom Kelly took over for, was at Joe Mauer's retirement press conference. And I mean, most teams probably went through 10 or 15 managers in that 34-year span, 35-year span. Whereas the Twins, it was literally Tom Kelly takes over in '86, Ron Gardenhire takes over after 2001, Paul Molitor had the last handful of years, and now Rocco. I mean, the Twins are an organization that is founded on, built on, and lives on stability and consistency. And part of the issue with what made everything fall apart was that they were just very old school. They were very much stuck in what almost felt like 1991, which incidentally was their last World Series win. And it was just very much, pitch to contact and mid rotation starters and, finding just good enough players and the Metrodome economics, where towards the end of it, they kind of couldn't afford to bring back some of their stars like Torrey Hunter, and basically Joe Mauer was the exception to that rule. And so they've modernized really quickly with the Rapsodo and that sort of thing that, we hear about the newer technologies and hiring a pitching coach out of college. I mean, they are rapidly modernizing, and they're not the Houston Astros. They're not even the Boston Red Sox, but they want to be one of those teams that when you and I talk about analytics and cutting edge of technology and ingenuity, they want to be one of those teams. And I think that they're making progress very quickly in that respect.
Now, I grew up in Rochester, New York, so I'm definitely aware of knowing essentially the ins and outs of how usually the Twins were normally going to approach the offseason, since it normally affected who was going to be on the Rochester Red Wings. Right. And you talked about the Red Sox and the Astros, and particularly a team like the Red Sox for the last couple of years who've been shelling out those big contracts for some of those elite players. And obviously we heard yesterday about Harper's new deal. But some of the new players that are coming to the Twins, big signing last week that I think a lot of people tend to gloss over was Minnesota getting Marwin Gonzalez. And I felt like as if that was probably one of the sneakiest, best signings that any team got this season.
Yeah, the thing that I think the Twins needed to embrace, and they chose an intelligent way to do it, was positional fluidity. When you look at teams like the Dodgers, who will have, Kike Hernandez play all over, and Austin Barnes and Chris Taylor and anybody else. I mean, I'm sure I'm missing a number of players that they've had. Max Muncy last year was kind of their big breakout story. The positional fluidity that you see there, and Rocco will bring some of that from Tampa Bay, obviously, is so valuable. And we're seeing it right now with Miguel Sano not having played in the spring training game yet due to a cut he got while celebrating his Dominican Series championship, is that Marwin Gonzalez can step in and play third base, and you're not relying on a Ronald Torreyes or an A-Ray Adrianza to play third base every day. You've got a very good big league regular. And then let's say Sano comes back 2 weeks into the season and Jonathan Scope maybe struggles like he did with the Brewers last year. You can let Marwin play at second base. And he's just that positional fluidity and the ability to mix and match for not only matchups, but a little bit of hot hand. I know that you maybe statistically don't need to ride that as much as people think, but you've got a guy who can play left field capably in addition to all the infield positions, gives you a good bat, especially from the right side where the Twins struggled against lefties last year. He checks off and fills a lot of the boxes the Twins needed to attack this offseason, as do Cruz, Scope, and Crone, all right-handed hitters with power. The Twins didn't hit lefties well last year, and a lot of balls that leave target field go to the left field side because of the shorter fence and just more accommodating dimensions. I mean, they really attacked some of their big weaknesses and didn't have to spend a ton of money doing so. I mean, they've been really economically disciplined, and I think they should be lauded for that.
Well, it always feels like, and especially when you think about how the Twins typically tend to go after a lot of middle infielders, particularly shortstops. Because I know
Mm-hmm.
their old axiom was always, if you see a good young shortstop in the draft, go after him. I mean, you think about guys like Johan Santana, you think about guys like Danny Santana that, were drafted as shortstops, but eventually went to different positions. It really, I feel like as if it kind of it raises a question of where the middle infield kind of goes from this year. I mean, obviously, you talked about you know getting rid of Dozier last year, which made sense because you get rid of a
Mm-hmm.
veteran bat there, maybe pick up. You think about a guy like Torres, who, of course, living in the New York area, I always, heard a lot of people said, it'd be nice if the Yankees would have given Torres an opportunity when they had him for the short time. And you
Right.
think about the addition of Scope, who, right before he got traded to Milwaukee, was putting up some pretty decent numbers. But I'll be honest, I mean, from what I saw in the postseason in the last couple of weeks of the season, you almost got to question what the Twins should really expect from Jonathan Scope as well.
Yeah, I mean, he's at an age where a bounce back is at least feasible. It's not like he's 34, 35, or even
Right.
like Brian Dozier, 32. Sorry, 31 going on 32. But yeah, to your point about the Twins and targets, they've always been kind of about the toolsy guys up the middle. Your Aaron Hickses, your Byron Buxtons, and that, and then shortstops as well. And you can always move those guys around. But I think it's too all about getting Royce Lewis to the big leagues as soon as possible, and seeing how that will factor in where Jorge Polanco goes, whether he'll stay at short or he'll go to second, or eventually one of those guys plays third and Sano slides over to first. And that's another thing too. Back to my positional fluidity is if they decide they really like a third baseman next year in free agency, well, Josh Donaldson, now that Nolan Arenado is re-upped with the Rockies, they have the ability to then move Sano over to first and, fix two spots in one fell swoop. And I think that they've managed to stay fairly flexible financially and position wise to the point where when they see an opportunity to improve the club, they can do it. And I think they've done a really nice job about that. And that's why I think two people are really sleeping on them as a team that can make some noise in the Central, because yeah, they didn't look that talented last year, but imagine, the Mauer and Morneau of this current era, which is Buxton and Sano, giving you absolutely nothing for an entire year. Again, 78 wins is actually pretty surprising that they came out that well. If you get even just a 3-win season by Fangraphs WAR from one or both of those guys, the narrative changes so much and so quickly to the point where, yeah, Cleveland may have to worry. And then from that point, Cleveland's window feels like it's closing. And I know Chicago's coming up fairly quickly. I'm not really a big believer in Detroit yet, and Kansas City has a lot of things to sort out. But you know what? The Twins had a lot of talent at one point too, and it took a long time for it to come up and settle. And Kansas City, to that point too, with their World Series teams, had guys like Gordon and Moustakas and Hosmer. If Chicago needs a little more time for these toolsy guys like Eloy Jimenez and Yohan Moncada to find their footing in the big leagues, the Twins have a nice opportunity here in the next few years to really make some noise.
I really agree that this is really a great opportunity for the Twins to try to stake that claim in the AL Central because, honestly, with the way Cleveland approached this offseason, letting people know that they were willing to get rid of Kluber or Bauer at this point, and with the fact that I can understand from the Cleveland front office standpoint of not trying to re-sign Brantley with his health issues in the past, it still leaves a huge issue in the outfield for Cleveland, which kind of leads me to my next talking point. You mentioned about having guys like Buxton, having guys like uh I can't think of the outfield right now. I know
Well,
Kepler
they've got
came on
Rosario and Kepler.
strong,
Yep,
right?
Rosario.
And Rosario, there we go. Rosario was the name I was looking for.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I know he's not necessarily an ideal right fielder. I mean, he's more or less a DH guy, but you add in Nelson Cruz, he could fill in the outfield, but you got to be thinking at this point he's going to be your everyday DH. That adds so much more of a power game to that Twins lineup that I think it really gives them a solid opportunity this year. Again, it's going to be dependent upon the pitching that they could seriously challenge Cleveland. Because I'll be honest, Cleveland's outfield to me is a mess. I know they were hoping for Zimmer to catch on. He struggled, and they obviously didn't decide to re-sign, or they didn't try to really go out and get any, I don't want to say high price or high talented outfielders. It felt like as if they were just going stagnant, and the window's now closing on that team.
Well, they traded for Jordan Luplow of the Pirates, who doesn't have much of a standout tool. Tyler Naquin had a nice rookie season, but hasn't done much since. I mean, they lost Lonnie Chisenhall, which again, two people haven't really said much about. But when he was healthy enough to play, he was a really nice player. I mean, he was kind of their Mike Moustakas, if you wanted to be in comparison. Or maybe their Alex Gordon moving from third base to the outfield. And yeah, I mean, for as bad as their outfield looks, I don't know that their bullpen is that much better. And to me, though, Cody Allen leaving, the fact that he signed a reasonable deal with the Angels tells me that they probably were out on him, and Cleveland thinks that there's something more sinister wrong with him as far as his future than just a few tweaks. Which I'm not trying to claim anything, any kind of nefarious thing, but when relievers come on track, sometimes they never get back on, and so I'm still surprised though that they haven't signed Adam Jones. I mean, to me, that just makes too much sense. But if they don't address their outfield, now that we're 3 weeks from opening day, I mean, in the vicinity of 3 weeks from opening day, it's concerning that with Lindor's injury, that they could start slow. Those things snowball. We saw it with the Twins the year that they only won 59 games. They started out like 1-9 or something. I can't remember exactly, but they just never got on track, even though they were a modestly talented team. And I have to imagine the morale in Cleveland isn't that strong. I mean, Corey Kluber is obviously the Klubot. He doesn't have that much emotion. But to hear that you guys aren't bringing back any of your free agents, you didn't sign anyone, and that you were on the trading block all off season long, we've seen what that did to Brian Dozier with the Twins. It just, as much as the guy's professional, it can mess with their psyche a little bit. And I just wonder if this is just a weird Cleveland team to me. I'm not saying that they're not potentially going to win 95 games and run away with the division, but I think people are sleeping on how flawed they are and how poorly that could translate for a season.
Which I think really draws to the point that I liked what Minnesota did. Obviously they weren't sexy signing their trade to get guys like Gonzalez or Scope or Cruz in. But it feels like as if, all right, we believe in the young players we got. And that was the one thing, again, reiterating that I felt that the Twins really had going for them, is that they had a lot of young players that they definitely believe in, and they're willing to give them the opportunity to fail and succeed so that they can learn, how to play together as a squad. And it brings to the point another player, Williams Astudio, and I don't think, has he had his visa issue cleared up yet? Because I know he is without a doubt one of the more exciting players that they got in their farm system.
Yeah, he's really entertaining in that. He got to camp here in the last weekend. Because I think that they want him to make the team, but I don't know if it's as a backup catcher, as if it's a third catcher and then a jack of all trades and pinch hitter extraordinaire. The big thing, though, with the pinch hitter for this team is that you've already got Marwin Gonzalez, who's kind of your jack of all trades utility guy, and so do you need a second one? But who are you pinch hitting for? I mean, you've got guys to up and down the lineup that can really hit, and so in the 7th, 8th inning, I mean, maybe you pinch hit for Jason Castro against a lefty, but otherwise you've got Byron Buxton, who really needs to be taking those at-bats to improve as a player. And I mean, Jorge Polanco is probably going to be your leadoff guy, or Max Kepler. You're not pinch hitting for those guys. So I think Astudillo makes the team. I think that's their goal. I just don't know what his role will be yet. And I think that the big thing with him too is he's just so entertaining. He's everything that you want to like about baseball, both that he can play and that he's got kind of the body type that I think the everyman in us all appreciate. But he just seems to truly love the game and just is a really, really good guy to have around the club. And so I just think the only thing we really missed out on was having him catch Bartolo Colon, because I think Twitter might have exploded.
I imagine that baseball Twitter would be referencing that pretty much every single day of the year, especially with the way this off season has been, with nothing really happening. You got to find something to get excited about.
Oh, it's been terrible here. I mean, in Minnesota, we're getting another snowstorm today, and we've gotten in the last month like 30 inches of snow. So we need all the positivity and all the warmth we can get, and that's a good spot. The latest thing I saw with Cologne, who isn't signed yet, is he was on like a yacht sipping
Yeah.
champagne. And so it's like, you know what? Bartolo is living his best life, whether he's in spring training or not, and I think we should all ascribe to that.
This year could be one of the best lives for this Twins franchise, and especially for the fan base. Because I
Mm-hmm.
know Beyond the Box Score mentioned a couple days ago that this year's Twins team could be probably the most fun team to watch in baseball. And as we've been talking about for the past 20 minutes, is just that this is a team that's on an upward swing. And again, because a lot of people outside of being a fan of the AL Central tend to really look down on this division, but it could be a very big year this year for the Twins.
Well, they're going to hit the crap out of the ball. I mean, they added Marwin, obviously, who can play all over. But CJ Crone, Jonathan Scope, and Nelson Cruz have all been 30 homer guys either in the last year or two. And you've already got guys like Eddie Rosario who can hit anything that's pitched or even rolled up to the plate. Byron Buxton is obviously very exciting. Max Kepler is going to have a really nice season. I feel very convinced of that. And I mean, that's just the outfield. Jake Cave, their fourth outfielder, had a wonderful breakout rookie season when the Twins got him basically on waivers. And beyond that, I mean, Jorge Polanco is one of the steadier young players in the game. Miguel Sano, oh, by the way, can also hit for power. And, they just have a lot of fun pieces. Jason Castro is a good defensive catcher who missed almost all last year. And behind him is Mitch Garver, who has been working crazy on his defense, and he can really hit too. So I think people are really sleeping on this team. And, we always look at like prospects from the mold of the Mauer Morneau or the Puckett Herbeck from an era before, kind of my youth. They have the Mauer Morneau of this current era was Buxton and Sano, but they've also got another one that's very close in Kirilloff and Lewis. If all four of Buxton, Sano, Kirilloff, and Lewis are on this team at the same time and clicking on all cylinders, this is a very dangerous baseball team. And I think Lewis is maybe a year off. Kirilloff was so rapid in his return from Tommy John surgery last year, and he's such a good, like, I think of him as Joey Votto light at the plate. I mean,
Right.
there's a chance he could come up and make some damage here, whether it's playing first base or moving Kepler to first base. There is so much to be excited about for Twins fans that I know they only won 78 games last year, but if everything comes to fruition and the way they're working right now, you certainly think it could, this is going to be very entertaining. And Beyond the Box Score was right on with that. This is going to be an entertaining ball club. And these guys in the front office and Derek Falvey and Thad Levine have turned that kind of thing around very, very rapidly.
I know it's early because we're still a couple weeks out from opening day. But looking at this team right now and looking at what could possibly go right, where do you see the Twins finishing, not only just in the AL Central, but being viewed by the rest of Major League Baseball this year?
I think they're going to win like 85, 86 ball games. And I think that a lot people think I'm crazy, but again, 78 wins last year with so many things that went wrong. They're still apparently in the mix for Craig Kimbrell, which just blows my mind. But the big thing there too is, you look at WAR, and even if he's a 3 WAR guy, it's not like you only add 3 wins to your total. I mean, first of all, you could be taking those wins from Cleveland because you play them so much.
Right.
Second of all, the Twins lost so many one-run games when they were really playing poorly early in the season last year that there's no way to know how winning those games might have changed the entire narrative of the season. But I also view reliever WAR and just WAR in general as kind of a thing that plays in the margins. If you apply that WAR to games that you just barely lost, you swing a lot of different games to the point where maybe a 3 WAR closer actually wins you 7 or 8 or 9 more games because of how dominant they are in those 1 and 2 run games. And so I don't know if that's a super unpopular way to look at it, because I've been a sabermetrics guy for a long time, but to go from Craig Kimbrell to Craig Kimbrell from, I mean, it was Brandon Kinsler 2 years ago, and it was kind of just Addison Reed and Fernando Rodney and whoever they threw at the wall last year. That's a huge jump. And if they make that move, I'm not saying they're the favorite. I'm not going to go out and say that, but man, I'll still say it. People are really sleeping on the Minnesota Twins.
Minnesota Twins looking dangerous this year. Thank you once again. Brandon Warne, he is the senior baseball editor at Zone Coverage Minnesota. Thank you for stopping by the bullpen today.
You got it, man. Thank you.
All right, thanks.